Hi, Dirt Bike Magazine here, and thanks for joining us for our 2020 250 Motocross Shootout. You might have thought that the 250 class would be quiet this year. The bikes don't look that different, but the Honda CRF250R, the Husqvarna FC250, the Kawasaki KX250, the KTM 250SXF, the Suzuki RMZ 250, and Yamaha YZ250F have a tighter shootout than you might think. Most of these bikes received some changes, and some of them were very effective. The result is that a tightly grouped class became tighter still, setting the stage for a very competitive 250 shootout. All the bikes were given fresh Dunlop MX53 tires and taken to 5 different tracks. Eventually, a new picture of the 250 class emerged. The 2018 Honda CRF250R arrived with a complete and total redesign, but it was a pro-only rever. For 2020, Honda's engineering cavalry finally arrived. The head and valve train were redesigned. Even though the chassis appeared unchanged, it got a new frame and swing arm with less rigidity. Overall, the Honda is the best handling bike in the 250 class. It turns well, it has excellent suspension, and the layout makes virtually everybody feel comfortable. The bike's peak power is as good as anything in the class, and this year the bottom end is much improved. Even though it still doesn't produce the torque that it did before the redesign, it has excellent throttle response. With the improvements in the motor and frame, the bike's overall personality is so agreeable that you can forgive its few flaws. Clearly, this is a case where a few changes went a long way. The Honda's weight is 227 pounds without fuel. The suggested retail price, $7,999. Husqvarna continues to try to develop its own identity. This year, much of the testing for the FC250 motocross bike was done independently of the KTM team. It still has a number of parts that are all its own, including the clutch hydraulics, the rims, the bodywork, and the airbox. Just like last year, the Husqvarna is fast and light. The motor has more low-end power than most of the new age 250s, and on top, it's the screamer it's always been. This year, there are some new vents in the airbox that give it a little more snap in the middle, and the existing map on the handlebar mounted switch gives you the option of altering the power delivery, if only slightly. Most riders view the new suspension settings as a clear improvement over the previous model. It has a cushier feel that it clearly needed. The hydraulic clutch has an excellent feel and the brakes are outstanding. We're big fans of Husqvarna's attempt to attract a more mature rider by giving it a softer feel. The trend needs to continue. For now, this bike still has a hard edge and requires a lot of commitment. The Husqvarna FC250 weighs 219 pounds without fuel and it sells for $9,199. Kawasaki looked at the previous KX250 in a very practical way and concluded that the only thing it really needed was more top-end power. It was already lighter than the other Japanese 250s, and the suspension would be easy to update. So, the 2020 model got a redesign from the crankshaft up. No electric start, no new bodywork, no hydraulic clutch. By doing it that way, Kawasaki kept the price low. As expected, the 2020 KX250 has excellent top-end power. It's now a screamer, with most of the good stuff happening right before the red line. There's no reason not to pull a hole shot with the new KX. Also as expected, the KX is lacking in low-end torque. It was a clear trade-off. The disappointing part is that the previous KX was a favorite among novices because of its low end, and now it makes the least of the group. It's just a sign of the times. But along the way, the bike became less distinctive. We also have to mention that the bike has no electric start, though you don't need a staff of test riders to tell you that. The 2020 KX250 weighs 223 pounds without fuel and sells for $7,799, which is the least expensive of the 6 motocrossers tested here. KTM 250 SXF looks far better than the other 250 4-stroke motocross bikes on paper. It's the lightest on the scale and one of the most powerful on the dyno. It's one of the most sophisticated with features like the hydraulic clutch, the Brembo brakes, and the Niken bars. And on the track, there's no arguing with power. The 250 SXF is fast in any contest against the other bikes. It doesn't get every hole shot, but it's not the bike's fault when it doesn't. Despite the numbers though, the KTM doesn't always feel especially powerful. The motor is slow revving and over-geared. We often make dramatic gearing changes to bring back the snap. This year it has a vented airbox cover that makes a slight improvement in throttle response, but only slight. The KTM is also a little harsh. The suspension is very effective at speed, but not especially plush when you're not going all out. Bottom line is that the performance is undeniable. The KTM has had the power for a pro rider to do his job, but a novice or intermediate might struggle to get the most out of it. The KTM weighs 218 pounds without fuel, and it sells for $9,099. Last year, Suzuki gambled. The company took a chance by presenting what they saw as an old-school, no-frills motocrosser that concentrated on the basics of handling and value. They might have recognized that electric start was more than a passing fad, but they thought the riders wouldn't demand it if the performance was there and the price was right. Overall handling is, in fact, a strong point of the 2020 Suzuki RMZ 250. It offers a good mix of cornering ability and stability, and the layout of the bike is excellent, but horsepower is critical for a 250 4-stroke, and the Suzuki is way off in that department. It can't keep up with most of the other bikes in the class and doesn't rev nearly as high. Even low-end torque is nothing special. And while the suspension components are good, they are a little unbalanced. The bike is stiff and especially harsh in the rear. Suzuki's strategy of sticking with the basics might have worked, but the execution wasn't what it should be. The Suzuki RMZ 250 weighs 226 pounds without fuel, and it sells for $7,899. The Yamaha FZ250F was redesigned for 2019, and it was a huge hit. It got a redesigned electric start motor with next stage Wi-Fi connectivity, it got a new chassis, it got back into the hunt in terms of power without giving up that much torque. In fact, the Yamaha has now inherited the mantle of 250 Torque King. The FZ250F might not have changed that much for 2020, but the rest of the class did, particularly with the Kawasaki turning into a screamer. That makes the Yamaha the easiest bike to ride and race. It also retains its crown on top of the suspension department, but just barely. Most of the other Japanese bikes have followed the FZ250F back to the proven formula of a coil spring fork and a well-balanced package. The YZ is a bike without true weak points. It only has areas where it doesn't excel. Its peak power is decent, but most of the other bikes in the shootout have it covered. In terms of handling, there's nothing wrong with the YZ. It does present a sensation of being heavy, even though the Honda hits the same number on the scale. There's no question that the Yamaha is an excellent machine. It appeals to both pros and novices. We only wish the Yamaha had kept on developing the bike after its spectacular first-year effort. There's still some work to be done in a few key areas. The Yamaha FZ250F weighs 227 pounds without fuel, and it sells for $8,199. It's impossible to come into a shootout without some preconceived notions. Last year's results set the stage. Any new winner would have to go through the YZ250F. By the same token, the bikes in this class have a history of being very closely matched. There were several contenders that could leapfrog 2 or 3 positions with only slight forward progress. That's exactly what happened. First place this year goes to the Honda CRF 250R. The Honda defies its numbers. It isn't the lightest, the most powerful, or the torquiest, but it is the most fun bike to ride. Honda achieved this with excellent overall handling and suspension. The motor still isn't perfect, but overcomes its weaknesses with great throttle response. You can bring the motor to life so quickly, you're never forced to wait. In case you've missed any of the previous tests of the 250 motocrossers, you can click on the icons now. And as always, go to dirtbikemagazine.com for all the latest news and features.